More students will return to the physical classroom come Monday, but the Jamaica Teachers Association, JTA, is pleading for caution. Some schools not on the approved list are considering the resumption of face-to-face classes, and the JTA warns against this. Anthony Logg reports.
132 schools have been assessed ready for face-to-face classes starting Monday, January 4. This was determined through the Education Ministry's ranking analysis formula. Some schools which did not meet the mark are making preparations to do so. President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, JTA Jasford Gabriel, is imploring administrators to adhere to the approved list for now.
I understand that there are other schools that are making requests to be added to the list, but we must stick with the formula that we have been using, which takes into consideration the Ministry of Health approval as well as the external factors under the risk management approach. And in the cases of the schools that are to be open, of course, the priority will be the examination students at the PEP at the CXC levels, that's including CSEC and CAPE.
Meanwhile, there's anxiety among parents and students preparing for major examinations. Some are eager to return to school due to fear that online classes are insufficient. Mr. Gabriel encouraged them to exercise patience.
The Ministry of Education working in collaboration with its partners, and certainly we have been part of the discussions through the e-COVID task force on education. We are seeing now an increased number in terms of the schools that will be open, but it's following a particular format or formula in terms of the Ministry of Health permission. That is critical, but we must also look at external factors which have to do with transportation and the risk in the communities from which the students are traveling, etc. And so we despite the anxieties that are out there, it's very, very important that we remain cautious.
The Education Ministry says the radio and television lessons will continue for exam students along with other special learning interventions. As for students who were not fully engaged for the October to December term, a mobile student support initiative will be launched for them on January 18. Anthony Logg, TVJ News.
And opposition spokesman on health, Dr. Maurice Guy, is in support of the risk ranking analysis being used by the Ministry of Education to determine which schools will reopen next week for face-to-face classes. In an interview with our news center, Dr. Guy said schools in low-risk communities should reopen.
I think it has to be assessed based on the parishes and the areas where we are seeing greater numbers. And I would think that for those areas where there are steady numbers or hardly any increases, then the schools ought to be open in those areas for face-to-face learning.
Education Minister Favour Williams says preparation for exit exams is the focus for this term. The new strain of COVID-19 is now in Jamaica. The Health Ministry made the announcement at a press briefing a short while ago. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says 4 of the 20 positive samples of persons who travelled to Jamaica from the UK on Monday, December 21, were found to have the new variant.
The Ministry can now confirm that 4 positive samples are of the new strain, the variant strain, which led to the restrictions in the first place. So those were tested. The Public Health Agency of the region, CARFA, got the samples, and 4 so far have been confirmed positive of the new strain.
Now, the new variant, which originated in the UK, has been wreaking havoc in southeast England and London. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 samples tested for Saturday, January 2, shows the highest positivity rate in weeks.
We have 118 positive cases from a sample tested of 513, and that's in the last 24 hours. This is a positivity rate of 23%, and it represents the highest positivity rate over the past 8 weeks.
Now, the minister says this is in line with the expected upward trend in positive cases due to the increase in overseas travel and other activities over the holiday season.
Education Minister Favour Williams says a decision hasn't been made as to whether students will be allowed to repeat grades due to learning loss caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Students are worried about the mental ability component of the upcoming PEP exams next month, but Mrs. Williams is warning against panic. Anthony Lugg has a story.
The president of the Jamaica Association of Principals of Secondary Schools, Linvern Wright, has suggested that students repeat their current grade because of the significant learning loss caused by the pandemic. TVJ News has learned that some students have indicated that they'll not be performing in any of the learning methods due to socioeconomic challenges. On Tuesday, during a tour of some schools in Kingston and St. Andrew, we asked Education Minister Fable Williams whether the government would consider allowing students to repeat.
At this time, it isn't, but that doesn't mean that if it's something we should do, that we won't. Again, as students come back to school, as we do assessment tests and so on, we will know where students are. And if there's a requirement, then that is what will happen. But there has been no policy so far or no broad-based decision about that just yet.
Some grade 6 teachers have expressed concern about the upcoming ability component of the primary exit profile PEP exams slated for February. The teachers argue that the students were not adequately prepared. The education minister says there's no need for panic.
The ability test is just that. It gives us a sense of where the child is. It alerts us so that we can adequately prepare them for the more important components of the PEP, which those parts will be had in May of 2021. So we're asking students, to try to relax. We want to test your ability, not necessarily your knowledge of the subject area or the curriculum.
Some parents are hesitant to send their children to school for face-to-face classes. But Mrs. Williams reminded parents that an assessment of the school's population was done before reopening.
We know that all students cannot be back on the school compound at the same time. So we're encouraging the flexibility. We're encouraging principals and teachers to use a combination of face-to-face and online. We are in a pandemic. It's not business as usual, and so we've made all these different options available to the schools, and we're imploring them to use these options to the max.
Anthony Lugg, TVJ News.
Meanwhile, the education minister is expressing concern about reports that students have not been participating in online classes. Mrs. Williams is reminding parents who instigate or condone their children missing classes that they're breaking the law.
Online, TV, radio, and in recent times, a phased resumption of face-to-face classes. These are all the learning methods in place for students due to the pandemic. But it's understood that some students have not been using all these methods available to them. Education Minister Fable Williams issued a warning to the parents.
You're breaking the law. Education is still compulsory. Our students must be engaged with the education system. It's not an option for parents not to do so. There must be one of those modalities that you can use. Our lessons are still being broadcast on television, on the cable networks, if you have cable in your home. And if you have none of that, if you don't have the online, if you don't have a TV or a radio, you should have collected the textbooks and workbooks for your child.
Mrs. Williams disclosed that some parents have not collected their children's textbooks since last year.
That is not something we should tolerate at all. And I would say to the schools, you need to go out and find those children, find those parents who are not being the kind of parents that we want to see in Jamaica, that take education serious. No child of school age should be, as I said in my remarks a couple of days ago, should be sitting around idly.
She says while the ministry understands that some may be facing challenges, keeping students away from classes is not an option. She's encouraging them to make contact with the school.
At the very least, your child should be sitting home with their textbook and worksheets. Teachers are going out into communities. Teachers are reaching out. And you have to do your part as a parent. You cannot have your child and your child is not being educated formally, it is not acceptable and will not be tolerated.
Anthony Lugg, TVJ News.
Welcome back. We're continuing the news. Dancehall entertainer Beenie Man has found himself on the wrong side of the law. There's a summons out for the self-styled King of the Dancehall DJ by police in St. Elizabeth in relation to a party held in November. A video being circulated online also appears to show the DJ promoting a New Year's party starting at midnight. Giovanni Dennis has the details.
The video creating a stir.
St. Elizabeth, if you know the party they reach, so you know say on New Year's Eve, or you have to ring in the New Year's, when you care who wants it. So if you know where the party there, you have to there, the party name 12 to 7. So we have bonfire, and you know some music, you know everything good. So, you know, walk on the money, yeah.
It's unclear when the video was made, if the event being promoted is from last year, or even if it's a prank. Either way, the St. Elizabeth police aren't amused. Deputy Superintendent Narda Sims is commanding officer for the division.
Let me say to patrons that there is no permit for any party whatsoever. Not for Beenie Man, not for anyone else.
Police are also interested in the Sim Simmer DJ for a party held in St. Elizabeth this past November. In the meantime, DSP Sims is urging persons intent on breaking COVID control orders under the Disaster Risk Management Act not to do so.
Let me say to party promoters one more time that if you have your parties, we are going to catch up on you. And when we catch up on you, you will be prosecuted with the full force of the law.
4 persons, including a party promoter, were arrested last night in St. Thomas for staging a party. Police report over 250 persons in attendance at the gathering in Nuts River that was shut down sometime after 10 o'clock. A pregnant woman was among several people warned for prosecution. Giovanni Dennis, TVJ News.
Welcome back to Primetime News, and a special welcome once again if you're watching on onespotmedia.com. Hotel mogul Gordon Butch Stewart is dead. Mr. Stewart passed away yesterday after battling an illness in the United States. He was 79. The country has been reacting to the passing of a man who has been hailed as a team builder, a genius salesperson, and a talented showman. Our coverage begins with how he spent his life in the eyes of Jamaicans.
Gordon Butch Stewart learned early in life how to fight against significant odds. This was perhaps best exemplified later in life when, as a highly successful businessman, he launched the Save the Dollar initiative. This was in 1992 when the value of the Jamaican dollar was plummeting. He intervened by committing to inject $1 million each week into the foreign exchange market at a set rate.
Everybody is manipulating the market. The speculators are out there speculating and winding the dollar through the ceiling. And I said to some of the friends that I have that work with me, but this is madness. If you have speculators that are blowing the dollar apart, why can't you have a friendly speculator that comes in?
The journey to that position of wealth and influence was not a predictable one. He was born on July 6, 1941 at the Nuttall Memorial Hospital near Crossroads in Kingston and grew up in St. Anne. He developed his interest in business from childhood and bought his first boat as a very young man. With that, he caught fish to sell to hotels and transport celebrity visitors. Then he started reconditioning old cars and selling them for a profit before entering the appliance sales business, establishing Appliance Traders Limited in 1968. His next act was to enter the tourism business with his first hotel in 1981. From that, he created Sandals Resorts International, which evolved into 2 main brands throughout the Caribbean: Sandals Resorts and Beaches Resorts. In 1993, he also entered the media business, establishing the Jamaica Observer newspaper. The Jamaican government divested the national airline Air Jamaica into the control of Butch Stewart in the mid-1990s. He immediately gave the planes newer, brighter colors and rebranded the airline the little piece of Jamaica that flies. Later, he also acquired the domestic airline Trans Jamaica and renamed it Air Jamaica Express. That experiment was not to last too long, however, and the airline was returned to government control. Butch Stewart was never afraid to take up causes in which he believed strongly, such as his support for casino gambling, which was opposed by strong interest groups.
I don't say you're going to have horse racing, lottery, bingo, slot machine, and you don't have gambling. I mean, unless we want to fool ourselves and make a mockery out of what morals should be or shouldn't be, etc. I think our economy needs it. I think the people of our country need it. I think the children that need to go to school and not being educated properly, these contributions will make a big difference.
Kalisha Williams, TVJ News.
Now, the leaders of the two major political parties have hailed Gordon Butch Stewart as a visionary in the tourism sector and a remarkable entrepreneur. O'Shane Masters picks up that angle.
Prime Minister Andrew Holness and leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, in a post on Twitter, said Butch was a man way ahead of his time. He noted that Mr. Stewart had an eye for detail, and his ability to market and deliver world-class service in any endeavor was tremendously distinctive. Mr. Holness says the founder and chairman of Sandals Resorts International has left an unmistakable mark across the region and the world. For opposition leader Mark Golding, Butch Stewart was a remarkable business leader, a tourism mogul extraordinaire, and a patriot. He also hailed Mr. Stewart's contribution in the growth of regional tourism. And Dr. Peter Phillips, former opposition leader, said Mr. Stewart was one of the great entrepreneurs of this era. He said Mr. Stewart was an expert at marketing and a giant in tourism. He said his name and brand are recognized in North America, Europe, across the region, and elsewhere. O'Shane Masters, TVJ News.
Meanwhile, reactions as well from former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. Dashan Hendricks has that story.
I feel a sense of personal loss.
Former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson sharing in the sorrow hanging over the nation with the passing of Gordon Butch Stewart. For Mr. Patterson, Butch was a larger than life, always finding opportunities in crises.
Gordon Butch Stewart did not only say it and believe it, but he practiced it.
He recounted how that spirit led Mr. Stewart into the hotel sector in the 1980s. Mr. Patterson, who was tourism minister in the 1970s, told the story of a meeting he had with the then prospective hotelier in which he was encouraged to enter the industry to earn foreign exchange.
I remember getting a letter from Butch Stewart the following morning that he had not only gotten the message, but he was prepared to embark on the acquisition of any hotel that might become available.
That first hotel was the Bayrock Hotel in Montego Bay. It was bought when the government sold some properties in the early 1980s and is now Sandals Montego Bay. Monies earned from that initiative were a big part of helping to stabilize the dollar in the 1990s when it was sliding rapidly. Mr. Patterson said people remarked on Butch Stewart's courage to invest at the time he did, but the brands it has grown into, he said, shows the resilience of a man he calls a friend.
I knew him well. He had a group of friends who were also my friends. He was always comfortable at a game of dominoes, always wanting to get people to go sailing with him.
Mr. Patterson also recounted Mr. Stewart stepping in to help the West Indies cricket team with a sponsorship and also starting the Jamaica Observer newspaper, but he admits all was never rosy with Mr. Stewart.
Like every human being, he had his frailties, but his virtues and the positive attributes which he brought to bear in the conduct of business outweighed by far any blemishes that he possessed.
He said Jamaica is poorer for Mr. Stewart's passing, but richer to have had him in the first place. Dashan Hendricks, TVJ News.